anecdotally suggesting would be the case is now official, proven by way of hard, fast numbers. There is not a single team in the NFL this offseason that has turned over its roster more than Washington. There's not a team in the NFL that will return fewer players from the previous season, fewer starters from the previous season. The Commanders' percent of players returning from 2023 right now, this is as high as it could be because they could still cut guys
Yeah, it's going to change.
as the roster gets whittled down. Dead last at 57% of their roster returning. And in fact, I saw another stat I wanted to throw out there in this same zip code, which is, man, is this tough for the Marty Party and Ron Rivera. If you look at the percentage of players from last year's NFL teams that are out of football, the Commanders dead last as well. 27.9% of their players from last year have not found jobs this offseason. Many of them obviously cut by the team and waiting on a phone call. That's a 4-13 team, new GM, new head coach. We're a long ways from Rivera saying that the next coach would take 40 of his players and go win a Super Bowl.
Yeah, send him the ring. This is, I don't see another way around that. The only way, like the ultimate, like Marty and Ron Defender could spin this would be, well, yeah, different systems. You see, they want to do slightly different things on both sides of the ball, and that's why. But it's clear as day. The new group came in, didn't make any mistake, didn't fool themselves into thinking they're right there. Add one big high ticket free agent, win the bidding war for one player or two players, and think that they were close, which was always the mistake of bad evaluators under Dan Snyder. And even here to the end post Snyder with Rivera and company, thinking that they were right there, thinking that their selections were so good that just you wait and see, you let me know. I looked at the analytics that time for almost an hour in Indianapolis, and that led me to saying Carson Wentz is the guy. Terrible decision makers who were awful at their gig bring you this level of talent. They need so much, and it was obvious. Now, I don't think they've solved everything, talking about Peters, Newmark, and company. This isn't over. This turnover is going to continue. I got news. A lot of these guys that are here as part of this new wave are not here for a long time by design. You're not tying yourself to somebody in their upper 20s, early 30s for a group that may or may not be any good. You're going to be starkly improved from last year talent-wise, but this is not a finished product by any stretch of the imagination. Guys they draft this year, guys they draft next year are going to form the core over the next handful of seasons to go with some of the guys that we already know, like McLaurin and Daron Payne and company.
Well, and hopefully, they only signed a couple of these guys this offseason. Tyler Biadasz at center, Dorrance Armstrong at defensive end, both Cowboys who came over to be with Dan Quinn. I would throw Frankie Louvu, the Carolina linebacker turned now Commanders, kind of do everything, second-level player. I hope they have a bigger, splashier offseason next year in that way. Like fewer of the stopgap bubblegum and duct tape 1-year guys that are veterans, which is what they had to do this offseason. They're trying to change a culture. They're trying to win some football games, but also just establish in their building what it means to be not terrible. And you're going to have to get a bunch of the guys that were on a terrible team out of here and bring in guys who have won. And so they're trying to do some of that. But I also think, to your point about the core, like you're going to have to spend to get.
Mm-hmm.
You can't be upset that you don't have nice furniture when you're going and buying furniture at the yard sale down the street, from someone who's moving it out of their house after 13 years. And so I think you're right. It's the guys that were left over still, believe it or not, from the Jay Gruden era, the Allens, the Paynes, the McLaurins. There are very few that were added during the Rivera era. There's a couple. And now you got to start hitting in the draft. They just had a 9-player class, and the free agency classes are going to have to be better than the last groups. But I was just thinking about how with the turnover, this is just a different team. Like we go into the season and we'll set expectations for them, and we'll use 4-13 last year, maybe not as the sole reason for our prediction, but as a governor. But they were a 4-win team last year, so how much better do you really get? It's a completely different team. And at the most critical position, an entirely different team where you've got Jaden Daniels now. Add to that this, I brought this up Friday, but this AI generator that has gone through a bunch of permutations and had all the games played on a computer, basically. So every NFL team's record is being spit out, and this thing says Washington's going to be 10-7 and make the playoffs as a wild card team. I'm not saying that that is definitely what's happening, but I think there's reason to be pretty excited here when you look at, like, computers now look at their roster and say, this isn't that bad. And it's a 1 year build because a lot of these guys are going to be gone, to your point. But there's no reason they can't compete this season for a playoff spot. I really genuinely believe that. We'll see when the dust settles on all the rosters how they stack up. It's too early to do that. We don't go through the schedule next week on this show and go win, loss, win, loss. But tell me why they couldn't be a lot better next year. It's a completely different team.
And I guess that's the takeaway. I mean, to me, the argument in favor of what you're saying is we don't know. Right? I mean, we can't know. I could slam the gavel if the majority of the 4-13 team came back. I go, I don't care who the coach is. I don't care about much of anything. This is an under-talented group that's overmatched. We hope, we think it's possible. I mean, I think I'm probably not even probably. I'm less bullish on them this year than you are. I think growing pains are inevitable. I could see them being dramatically improved and still only being a 6 or 7 win team, but with the arrow trending somewhere. Because in years past, they would do that. And it would be an empty calorie, pointless Ryan Fitzpatrick or Taylor Heineke short-term 6-win team or 7-win team or whatever the nonsense was that we're always forced to stomach. This is with a kid quarterback with upside. There's a point to this. This year, for the first time in a long time, has a point. There's actually reason to tune in, reason to be excited, whether it happens this year, next year, or 2 years from now, or whatever. But I think your point actually is a valid one in the sense that there's so much variance, there's so much unknown. The holdovers are guys that either produced consistently, Allen, Payne, McLaurin, someone that dramatically underproduced last year with a bad coaching staff and a bad regime, Dotson, maybe still with upside, or Emmanuel Forbes or some of the others. There's plenty of room to grow here. So it's absolutely possible they could be frisky.
Well, I guess my point more succinctly would be they were bad last year, and they haven't been good at any point in the last few years.
Mm-hmm.
And based on that, you go, it's hard to get a lot better really quickly. But this is a borderline unprecedented offseason in terms of ownership group is new and making new decisions. New GM, new head coach, entirely new coaching staff, and the roster is going to end up being, I think, over 60% reworked. Think about that.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to maybe see as many as 65, 70% new players on this roster at the end of the offseason if they make a couple of more moves, go get a left tackle, at cutdown day. That doesn't happen. So who cares that they were 4-13 last year? Really, what matters is twofold. Number one, what is Jayden Daniels? If Jayden Daniels in 2024 is able to provide the Robert Griffin effect of 2012, they can be pretty good pretty quickly. Remember, in 2012, by the way, they went from 3-13, or 4-12, maybe it was, to a 10-win team that won a division title the following season. If Jayden Daniels is pretty good, you've got this entirely new remade roster. I don't think it's crazy when you take context and nuance and what they were last year and what this team has been for years out of the equation, and you just look at the players on the team, all of whom were brought in this offseason to try to change the culture a little bit. And if the computer algorithm spits out, I see 10 wins and a wild card. Like, it's not that crazy. Name one area of this roster where they're worse off now than they were a year ago, other than backup quarterback. Because I think going from Jacoby Brissett to Marcus Mariota is a downgrade. What's one other area on this team where they're not better right now than 365 days ago?
I'd say defensive end is probably the only one I could point to because you had Montez Sweat and Chase Young entering the season.
Chase Young wasn't good.
We know that.
Montez Sweat was, and you're way deeper now. You don't have a Montez Sweat. I will grant you this. He was the best player of last year's group or this year's group. But in going and getting Armstrong, who may have been the second best defensive end either year, you also added Clelin Ferrell and Dante Fowler, who's had a recent 6-sack season. You signed 3 guys. That's a much deeper position. At the end of last year, it was Casey Toohill and KJ Henry. Now it's Armstrong, Ferrell, Fowler, Henry in year 2. I technically still have F.A. Obata, Andre Jones in year 2. I agree on the Sweat thing, but
my point is it's all debatable. So
that position is debatable.
It's not to contradict you. It's to say this is obvious. Maybe somebody who could say it's with Kendall Fuller in the fold, they may have been better at cornerback this year or last year at this point in time.
You're naming individual players they lost. The rooms are better. The defensive end room is deeper, and the corner room is way deeper.
Yes, I'm saying someone might be able to try to make that argument. Whether I agree or disagree, the point stands. The point is obvious. The point is intuitive. How much better? That's TBD. But I know I would rather have this cornerback room than last year's with some upside. I'd probably take Montez Sweat, a sure thing, over some guys, on prove-it deals or a situational pass rusher like Dorrance Armstrong. But the point is it's not that big a drop-off. Everywhere else, they're better. That's on purpose, right? I mean, the wide receiver room is deeper. Well, maybe not without Curtis Samuel. But the point is they've gone hard on at least a short-term, let's raise the talent level with a couple of guys that might be here for a while. So, yeah, they've improved dramatically in almost every spot.
I think their wide receiver room's way better this year than last year because Dotson is going to be a much better version of Dotson. Dotson last year was not good. I don't know if it was the offense or the usage or how he meshed with Howell or Bieniemy. I don't know why. But Jahan Dotson year one versus Jahan Dotson year two are pretty different guys.
Different people.
And we'll see if I'm right. I believe that he will not play at the level he did last year. I think he'll be much better than that. McLaurin had the worst year of his career last year, statistically. Yeah. I think part of it was, if you remember, and I don't think we talk about this enough. Remember, he got hurt at the very end of the preseason and was questionable for week one. He ended up playing.
He had like a toe or something, I think.
A turf toe.
Remember so? Yeah.
I think it was a mistake, probably in hindsight, that he came back. But I thought he was a little bit sapped from an explosiveness and a wiggle standpoint. But this wide receiver room, again, same as kind of when you mentioned corner or defensive end, they lost a good football player. I'm looking at the depth of the overall room and the position where you go get Luke McCaffrey, you bring in Zaccheaus, who's had a lot of success in the league. You've got Dotson and McLaurin, theoretically, who elevate. They brought back Jamison Crowder as well. I think it's right there. It's about how we're going to view the conversation of how much does last year matter in your expectations. Because what we are conditioned to do is to go, well, the Nationals last year were a 71-win team. This year, if they can build on that, they get to 75. Well, they had the same roster. This is like an expansion team almost to me. I mean, last year is so irrelevant to the grand scheme of things. And also, they love Jayden Daniels. We're going to talk a little later in the show about the John Keim ESPN story, where clearly he talked to some people in the building, and they basically sang the praises of Daniels as to why they drafted him. If they're right about Jayden Daniels, who's going to start right away, he should be able to have some of those year one explosive, incredible performances.
A couple highlight reel plays. There you go.
You're going to rip off some big touchdown runs. He's going to make some big time throws. There's really no reason why they can't be a pain in the butt to play immediately. They should be. I mean, they brought in a lot of older veteran guys that are, this isn't like in the case, and I'll just pick random guys that, off the top of the head, but like Bobby Wagner or, Michael Davis in the secondary. Like, these aren't guys that need 2 years to develop or by next year. They signed 1-year deals to come here to make you a little better and elevate your floor this season.
The phrase pain in the butt to play is kind of what I'm looking at. Like, I'd like to do that in this first year as Daniels develops. Like, and that's, I think, kind of what they're going for too. They're not here to be pushovers. They're not here to be somebody's punchline and just be cannon fodder for a division that was actually pretty good. When you kind of look back to last year compared to this year, if you buy what I'm selling, which is that this staff was overwhelmed for the most part. They're not to say there weren't any good coaches on that staff. They kept a couple, like Davita Pritchard is obviously a pretty bright mind, but I think the staff wasn't very good. I know the front office was terrible. So when you add all that up, it was amateur hour-ish in a lot of ways. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think it's a professional group here at all facets, everybody from soup to nuts. So I think that matters a little bit. So that gives the benefit of the doubt to guys like Dotson having much better seasons in year 3 than it did in year 2. For whatever reason, it didn't go well. I'm sure he shares some of the blame. I'm sure the offense shares some of the blame. There's a million reasons why it didn't go well. But You remove a lot of those, and now we get to kind of see it, maybe a more truer sample. So I hope that that's certainly the case. But you're right. There's a lot of unknown here in the sense that we don't know how all these guys will be together, but we do know that A, they've increased the talent level. B, they've increased the seriousness of the organization, right? It's not a joke. It's not a punch on anymore. Adam Peters and company are absolutely competent, and that goes a long way to me.
I want to open up the phones on this and see what you guys think on the MGM National Harbor listener lines at 800 636 1067. That's 800 636 1067. This idea that the Commanders might actually be a lot more competitive way quicker than people think. And to go back to something you said a few minutes ago, I'm not suggesting that sustainably they have built this thing so that they make the big leap to 9 or 10 wins, let's say this year, and they're just there every year. To me, they have kind of spent their offseason focusing just on being better this year and less on, 3 and 5 years out, which is maybe what I would have prioritized. But I do think it's very possible that they are more competitive this season, battling in December to get into the playoffs, whatever, than maybe people expect. And then you take another step back in the offseason because unless you go out and sign a bunch of guys to those one-year deals again, those expire and you got a ton of holes on the roster. But I guess my question to you would be this. If Jaden Daniels is really good as a rookie this year, how wouldn't they be a 10-win team with this roster? 9-win team at least, over 500. If Daniels is really good, if he's explosive and he's a weapon and, it looks like, I'm not saying he has to be C.J. Stroud, but it looks like they hit a home run a la the Texans last year. Then, of course, they're going to be a lot better than people think immediately. Is it crazy to think that way? We got stewing on this because of some of the charts that came out today. Number 1 out of 32 teams in terms of biggest turnover. Number 1 out of 32 teams in terms of the guys that left not getting jobs. So they've moved on from a lot of players that aren't going to go elsewhere and play a ton this season. It means they're improving, that the personnel theoretically is better. Grant and Danny on the Fan.